July 24th, 1943. Hamburg, Germany. The night begins like hundreds before it. The rumble of distant engines, the bark of flak guns, and the tense murmurs of Luftwaffe night fighter crews waiting in the dark. Ground controllers sit beneath glowing radar screens, tracking the approaching Allied bombers. For years, this has been Germany's edge, a network of eyes in the sky that can see through cloud, smoke, and darkness. But tonight, something is wrong. At 10:58 p.m., every scope across northern Germany flares into chaos. The once clear radar returns blur, distort, and vanish beneath a storm of static. The controllers pound their consoles, thinking a fuse has blown, or perhaps sabotage. One man at Stade Airfield calls it the moment the heavens dissolved. Up above, RAF Lancaster bombers hold formation over the North Sea. In the laid plane, Wing Commander Guy Gibson peers through the blackness and murmurs, "They won't see us coming this time." Each aircraft carries bundles of thin metallic strips. Window, a British invention so simple, it borders on absurd. Clouds of aluminum cut precisely to match the wavelength of German radar. When released, the strips fall slowly, painting false echoes across every screen. On the ground, Luftwaffe pilot Oberleutnant Peter Spoden runs toward his Ju-88 night fighter. The radio crackles with confusion, orders shouted, cancelled, reissued. His radar operator, young and pale, stares at a screen blooming with meaningless dots. "They're everywhere," he says, "or nowhere." The sky over Hamburg begins to hum. Then, suddenly, it falls silent. No guidance, no targets, no control. German pilots lift off into a void where the enemy could be anywhere, or nowhere at all. It is the first night of Operation Gomorrah, and the beginning of something far greater. The death of the Luftwaffe's technological advantage. The night the sky went silent. The bombers crossed the coast at 11:10 p.m. 1,000 aircraft, Lancasters, Halifaxes, and Sterlings, sweep in waves toward Hamburg. Beneath them, the city sleeps under blackout, unaware that the rules of air war are about to change forever. Inside a Ju-88 night fighter, Oberleutnant Spoden struggles to find bearings. His radar operator, Karl, taps the screen again and again. Nothing but static. Their Liechtenstein radar, the pride of German engineering, now stares into a blizzard of ghosts. "Try the visual intercept," Spoden shouts. But the sky is pitch black. The only light comes from tracer fire far below. Random bursts from gunners shooting blind into the void. In the command bunker at Stade, Major von Rau paces behind his radar crews. "Why are the echoes multiplying?" he demands. "That can't be one raid." But the technicians only shake their heads. To their eyes, it looks as if hundreds of new bomber streams are materializing from nowhere, an impossible swarm stretching from the North Sea to Bremen. Meanwhile, over the target, the first flares bloom, red, green, and white, pathfinder markers guiding the bombers onto their aim points. Then comes the storm. 2,300 tons of explosives and incendiaries fall upon the city, turning entire blocks into firestorms. The heat rises high enough to twist steel beams and pull air into a roaring vortex. Down below, German civilians cling to cellar doors that glow with heat. One survivor would later recall, "The sky was red and then it went black. No one could hear anything except the wind." Up above, the RAF crews fly untouched. The night fighters that once cut through bomber streams like wolves are lost, hunting ghosts. Gibson's gunner watches a searchlight flicker helplessly, then fade. "They can't find us," he mutters, disbelief in his voice. The silence on the German airwaves grows heavier. No vectors, no altitude calls, just confusion. The sound of a system unraveling in real time. In a single night, Window has turned the Luftwaffe's precision into blindness, and the Allies, for the first time, own the night. Weeks earlier, inside a nondescript building in Farnborough, a group of British scientists and officers gathered around a wooden table. On it lay strips of shiny paper, the thickness of cigarette foil, cut to lengths of about 27 centimeters. To the untrained eye, it looked absurdly trivial. To the men in the room, it was a weapon powerful enough to alter the war. Radar scientist Joan Curran had refined the idea from earlier tests. Each strip, she discovered, would reflect the same wavelength as the German Würzburg radar, the type directing flak and night fighters. Released by the thousands, the strips created a storm of false echoes, masking the bombers entirely. But the idea terrified British command. Churchill's scientific advisors warned that if they used window, the Germans might copy it instantly, blinding Allied radar in turn. For months, the invention sat locked in files marked "Most Secret." Then came the spring of 1943. The RAF's night losses had reached catastrophic levels, entire bomber crews vanishing into darkness over the Ruhr. The Luftwaffe's radar-directed night fighter system, Kammhuber Line, was cutting through the RAF like a razor. Air Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, commander of Bomber Command, made the decision. We use it, or we die trying. Tests showed it worked beyond expectation. When the first bundles were dropped during training, the radar screens below erupted into chaos. One officer laughed. It's like watching a snowstorm over Berlin. Now, that snowstorm had arrived for real. On the night of July 24th, 1943, Window was unleashed over Hamburg for the first time. Its simplicity mocked the complexity of German technology, foil against physics, paper against power. The irony wasn't lost on those who knew. In a war fought with machines, it was the smallest, quietest weapon that silenced the skies. Over northern Germany, the Ju-88s climb and weave through black air, thick with smoke and static. The pilots are hunting by instinct now. Old school, seat of the pants flying in a world once ruled by machines. Oberleutnant Spoden wipes sweat from his brow. His radio crackles with fragments, voices calling out bearings, each contradicting the last. I've lost them. They're heading north. Wait, no. West. Then only static. He banks hard to port, scanning for silhouettes. The night that once belonged to him now feels alien. His onboard radar, his trusted guide, shows dozens of phantom targets, each one a lie. They could be right beside us, Carl mutters, or 50 miles away. Far below, the city of Hamburg burns, entire districts swallowed by fire. The smoke reaches so high that the bomber formations are forced to climb to avoid turbulence. One British navigator scribbles in his log, "Sky glowing red, feels like flying above the end of the world." When Spoden finally sights a shadow crossing the moonlight, he dives to intercept. He lines up for attack, and then the blip vanishes. The enemy was nothing but drifting chaff. The radar shows another target, then another. He chases ghosts until his fuel gauge screams for home. At dawn, the Luftwaffe crews return in silence. They'd been in the air all night, and not one confirmed kill. It's the first time since 1939 that the hunters return empty-handed. At a briefing the next morning, a senior radar officer slams his fist on the table. It's a trick, he says, a deception. But no one can explain how. The equipment had not failed, it had been fooled. In Berlin, the reports reach the Air Ministry. Hermann Göring refuses to believe it. Impossible, he declares. No one can make our radar blind. But by the next night, it happens again. And again. The Luftwaffe's technological edge is evaporating. Their pilots still fight bravely, but without the unseen hand guiding them through the dark. Courage alone is no match for confusion. The sky, once their domain, now belongs to silence. By the third night of bombing, Hamburg is no longer a city. It's a furnace. Allied incendiaries ignite hundreds of separate fires, which merge into one vast firestorm. Winds howl at hurricane force, dragging oxygen and people alike into the flames. From 10,000 feet, RAF pilots stare down at a sight they can scarcely comprehend. "We could see the city glowing through the clouds," one recalls. "It looked alive, like it was breathing fire." The German civil defense units are overwhelmed. Water pressure fails. Roads melt. Entire families vanish inside air raid shelters that become ovens. The Luftwaffe's once fearsome flak batteries fire blindly, guided only by memory and desperation. Without radar, their shells burst in empty sky. A British wireless operator records the eerie calm inside the aircraft. No fighters, no searchlights, only the hum of engines and the glow below. For many airmen, it's the first time they've flown a mission without seeing a single enemy plane. On the ground, those same flames devour 40,000 lives. The heat is so intense that it lifts cars and bodies into the air. The next morning, Luftwaffe crews taxi out across runways coated in ash and realize they are fighting a war they can no longer see, let alone control. For the German people, this night marks a cruel awakening, that their skies, once shielded by radar and discipline, are now open. For the Allies, it marks something else, the dawning power of electronic warfare. The bombers return home untouched, their crews silent, unsure whether to feel triumph or horror. One navigator writes simply in his diary, "The city was gone, and the sky had forgotten how to fight." The silence had worked, but it came with a sound humanity would never forget. The roar of fire consuming a city that could no longer defend itself. Berlin, early August 1943. Inside the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, the German Air Ministry, tension simmers like a wound. The reports from Hamburg lie stacked in front of Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, hundreds of pages detailing radar failures, phantom contacts, and catastrophic losses. He slams his palm on the table. "Lies," he snaps. "British propaganda." But deep down, even Göring senses the truth. Something invisible had invaded Germany's skies. Generals argue across the table. General Kammhuber, architect of the night fighter defense line that bears his name, insists the system still works. "We simply faced saturation," he argues. "Too many aircraft at once." But the radar technicians know better. They've replayed the recordings. They've seen the static storms, the false echoes rising and falling like ocean waves. "It's deliberate," one engineer whispers. "They're blinding us." Göring demands answers. How could foil defeat science? No one dares to explain that the very precision of German radar makes it vulnerable to something so absurdly simple. Meanwhile, across Britain, window is now standard practice. Bomber crews joke that they're sprinkling silver snow over Europe. Each bundle tossed out the flare chute drifts down for minutes, filling the air with an invisible curtain of confusion. In Berlin, countermeasures begin. Scientists rush to design filters, oscillators, and new wavelengths that can cut through the noise. But every adjustment takes time, and every night the bombers come again, leaving more craters, more dead, and more panic. By mid-August, Luftwaffe morale has begun to fracture. Pilots mutter in mess halls that their eyes have been stolen. Radar operators grow superstitious, refusing to touch screens that flicker with ghosts. One technician describes the feeling in his diary. "We were trained to see the enemy in lines and dots. Now we see only snow, endless falling snow. For the first time since 1939, the Luftwaffe is fighting blind, both literally and spiritually." And Göring, who once promised that no enemy bomb would ever fall on German soil, now stares out the window of his ministry and watches the smoke rise from the ruins of Hamburg. At RAF Bomber Command, the success of Window electrifies the staff. What had once been a desperate gamble is now the most powerful secret in their arsenal. But among the scientists, excitement gives way to a deeper realization. The age of radar warfare has just begun. In a lab outside London, engineers from the telecommunications research establishment study captured German radar components. They see sophistication, but also rigidity. Systems built on fixed frequencies, predictable behaviors, perfect for deception. Joan Curran, the physicist behind Window, works late into the night, testing new variations. Different materials, lengths, and dispersal methods. Each change tweaks the reflection, creating new ghosts in the German skies. She and her colleagues laugh grimly at the irony. In a war defined by bombs, it's the illusion of targets that wins the night. Back in Germany, technicians at the Luftwaffe air signal service scramble to adapt. They adjust frequencies, hoping to escape the interference. But the British respond in kind, matching every move, every wavelength. It becomes a duel fought not with bullets, but with signals, silence, and imagination. By late 1943, Window has spawned an entire branch of warfare, electronic countermeasures. The British call it radio warfare. The Americans dub it ECM. Whatever the name, it is invisible and unstoppable. Pilots notice the difference immediately. Where once flak and fighters tore through formations, now missions return with fewer losses. It feels like flying through fog, one Lancaster captain says. They can't see us, but we can still feel them searching. Behind every victory, though, lies unease. The crews know the price Hamburg paid. They also know that Window works both ways. If the Germans ever copy it, Britain's own radar defences, the chain home stations guarding its coasts, could be blinded overnight. It's a silent race now, both sides racing to master a weapon that makes the sky itself lie. The war of steel and fire is becoming a war of ghosts. Autumn 1943. Over the North Sea, the RAF's bomber streams are now a nightly ritual, engines droning in endless procession toward the Ruhr. The crews have begun to trust Window as if it were armor. Each new mission begins the same way. Test the flaps, check the oxygen, then toss the bundles into the darkness and watch them vanish below like falling stars. Inside one Lancaster, Flight Lieutenant Alan Mercer listens to the dull thump of the bomb bay doors closing. "Snow away," he tells his navigator. Within seconds, the radar jamming strips scatter and drift, spreading across miles of airspace. The German screens below erupt in chaos again. Another night of blindness. But in those same moments, on the ground near Hanover, a young German radar operator named Otto Weiss sits before his scope, watching the storm of false returns. He's 21, exhausted, and frightened. "They've filled the sky with ghosts," he tells his superior. The officer only nods. "Keep searching," he orders, though they both know it's useless. Otto remembers a time when the radar had felt alive, when blips moved with rhythm and clarity, when each target meant a real bomber. Now the screen feels haunted, mocking him with phantom armies that cannot be fought. Above him, Mercer's crew reaches the target. They drop their load and turn for home, guided by stars and a compass needle, trembling in turbulence. They never see a single fighter. "It was the quietest raid of the war," Mercer later says. "Too quiet. We all felt it." That silence becomes a legend among airmen. Veterans call it the Blind Nights. The term spreads through both sides' ranks, half in awe, half in fear. For the first time, war itself seems to have gone invisible. Unseen, unheard, yet still utterly lethal. Back in London, intelligence analysts monitor intercepted German transmissions. Confusion, contradiction, commanders accusing each other of incompetence. One report simply reads, "Enemy radar incapable of coherent tracking, entire network disrupted." For Bomber Command, this is vindication. For the Luftwaffe, it's disintegration. And for the men on both sides, the silence in the sky is becoming something far stranger, a kind of dread that feels almost supernatural. Winter descends on Europe, and with it comes the German reply. Out of the research centres at Rechlin and Darmstadt emerges a desperate idea: Naxos, a small receiver tuned not to find bombers, but to locate the very radar signals emitted by British aircraft. If they can't see the enemy directly, they will hunt their hunters by the echoes they leave behind. Oberleutnant Spoden, the same night fighter pilot who flew blind over Hamburg, now tests the new equipment in his WWII. The receiver hums faintly in his headset, whispering bearings like a ghost voice from the dark. It's not perfect, but it's something. The Germans begin to regain fragments of sight. On a few nights, fighters intercept isolated bombers, guided by the faint hiss of Naxos. One by one, small victories are claimed, though they do little to stem the tide. At the same time, the Allies continue refining their own tricks. Alongside Window, they introduce Mandrill, a jammer that drowns entire radar networks in noise, and Boozer, a warning device that alerts British crews when German radars lock onto them. The invisible duel escalates. In Berlin, physicist Dr. Hans Hollmann briefs Göring's staff. This is not a war of aircraft anymore, he warns. It is a war of frequencies. The generals listen politely, but dismiss him. They still measure power in tons of bombs and numbers of fighters. Yet, outside the conference rooms, the truth spreads among technicians and airmen alike. Every night, more crews return saying the same thing. We can't see them. The sky lies to us. For the first time in history, electronic deception is shaping the outcome of battles. Long before most soldiers even understand it's happening, the sky that once roared with engines now hums with static, trickery, and silence. And somewhere in that silence, the balance of the air war is shifting, permanently. January 1944, central Germany. The winter has frozen rivers, fields, and the morale of a nation, now under constant attack. Each night, the sirens wail. Yet when people look skyward, they see nothing. No lights, no fighters, only the faint shimmer of silver drifting down through the dark. Those who survive begin to call it Der Silbern Regen, the silver rain. Children scoop it from the streets the next morning, unaware it blinded their father's defences hours before. For the Luftwaffe's night fighter crews, the silence is maddening. In the blacked-out hangars at Venlo, pilots wait beside their aircraft, drinking bitter coffee, eyes hollow from sleeplessness. They are ordered to fly intercepts without radar support, to hunt by instinct. It's a cruel demand. Without vectors or visual cues, even finding the bomber stream is a miracle. Oberleutnant Spoden climbs into his Ju-88 once more. He's older now, the war has aged him years in months. His operator, Karl, straps in, muttering a prayer. They climb through cloud and starlight into a void so dark it feels like being buried alive. For hours they fly, hearing nothing but the drone of their own engines. The radio stays dead, no guidance, no chatter, no command. They've left us deaf, Karl whispers. We are chasing shadows. At 15,000 feet, a flicker of light, a flare. No, just a reflection of moonlight off drifting chaff. They chase it anyway. It vanishes again. By dawn, Spoden lands empty-handed. The ground crew doesn't even ask for a report anymore. Everyone knows what it means when a fighter returns with all its ammunition untouched. In London, meanwhile, Bomber Command studies the data. Mission success rates have climbed sharply since the introduction of Window. Crews lost per 1,000 sorties, once 60, now half that. We've broken their night eyes, Harris tells his staff. Yet, the victory tastes hollow. The crews who've flown over Hamburg, Kassel, and Berlin have seen what happens when the bombs fall unopposed. One navigator, still trembling from his last mission, says quietly, "They can't see us, but God can. The silence that protects them is also what haunts them. Spring 1944 brings a new phase of the invisible war, a technological arms race fought in laboratories, not skies. On the German side, scientists work feverishly to redesign radar systems immune to window. They experiment with Freya, Mammut, and Würzburg Riese arrays operating on shifting wavelengths. Engineers devise mathematical filters to identify the drifting, falling patterns of chaff and separate them from real aircraft. Some even propose radar that pulses irregularly, hoping to confuse Allied interference. But every new defense takes weeks, sometimes months, to deploy. And the Allies, with their own teams of physicists and codebreakers, anticipate nearly every move. At RAF Malvern, the telecommunications research establishment is now the most secret building in Britain. Here, physicists Joan Curran, Bernard Lovell, and others are developing the next wave of deception. Window was only the beginning. Now come, carpet and jostle, high-power jammers capable of smothering radar frequencies entirely. Every night, the duel plays out invisibly above Europe. German operators adjusting dials, British crews flicking switches, both sides listening to static, hoping to catch a glimpse of the other through the noise. And while scientists duel with equations and frequencies, the men in the sky feel the consequences. Luftwaffe pilot Helmut Lent, one of Germany's top night fighter aces, writes bitterly in his logbook, "We are flying blind, the instruments lie, the ground cannot guide us, victory now depends on chance." In England, bomber crews feel both relief and guilt. The new technology is saving their lives, but it's also changing the nature of war itself. Machines are fighting machines, and humanity is somewhere in between. By May 1944, the British scientists realize they've created something far greater than a tactical trick. They've built the foundation for a new kind of warfare, one where the battlefield is invisible, and silence is the deadliest weapon of all. The Luftwaffe still fights bravely, but its ears are gone, its eyes deceived, and its confidence shattered. The skies of Europe now belong to the static. June 1944, France. As dawn breaks over the English Channel, thousands of Allied aircraft roar toward Normandy. Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion, has begun. Yet hidden beneath the thunder of engines is a quieter triumph, the mastery of deception. Days earlier, the Allies unleashed a web of electronic tricks designed to blind the Luftwaffe completely. Window is deployed in massive sheets, forming false radar echoes along the French coast. To German operators, the invasion seems to be coming not toward Normandy, but toward Calais, the expected, logical target. As paratroopers leap into darkness and landing crafts slice through the waves, German radar stations from Boulogne to the Netherlands explode in confusion. Their scopes show hundreds of phantom fleets, entire armies that do not exist. Field Marshal Rommel's air commanders scramble fighters to intercept the wrong invasion. At 3:45 a.m., a Luftwaffe night fighter group receives orders to intercept bombers over the Pas de Calais. They launch into blackness, only to find empty sky. By the time they realize the deception, it's too late. The Allies are already landing in Normandy. The silence that once shielded British bombers now protects the greatest amphibious assault in history. From his bunker near Paris, General Joseph Kammhuber listens to the radio traffic, face ashen. "This can't be right," he mutters. "They've made the machines lie again." And he's right. The same technique that first blinded his defences over Hamburg now misleads his entire command. Radar, once Germany's sharpest weapon, has turned traitor. Over the beaches of Normandy, Allied pilots marvel at how few enemy fighters appear. One RAF controller says quietly, "It's as if their eyes have been sewn shut." Behind every paratrooper who lands safely, every ship that reaches the shore, lies the invisible hand of those who mastered the silence. What began as a desperate experiment with strips of foil has become the backbone of an invasion. And for the Luftwaffe, it marks the moment they lose not only the night, but the war above Europe itself. Late summer, 1944. Across the airfields of northern Germany, rows of night fighters sit grounded, gleaming steel relics of a strategy that no longer works. Oberleutnant Peter Spoden, now weary and disillusioned, walks along the tarmac. He has survived more than 100 sorties. He has watched friends vanish into darkness, chasing false contacts until fuel ran dry. Now, orders arrive less often, and when they do, they make little sense. Intercept west of Hanover, they say. But there's nothing left to intercept. Each night, the sky hums with Allied bombers. The Kammhuber Line, once the pride of the Luftwaffe, is fragmented beyond repair. Gaps stretch for miles where radar once stood. Allied jammers drown every signal. Window fills every gap with ghosts. Spoden's operator, Karl, writes in his notebook, "The silence is worse than the noise. Before, we feared death. Now, we fear nothingness." Command orders new radars, new tactics, even new aircraft like the Mi-260 jet. But they all depend on information, and information is what the Allies have stolen. At night, the German controllers stare into static screens, seeing phantom bomber streams drifting in patterns that lead nowhere. Each false echo sends men scrambling into the sky for nothing. On the ground, morale collapses. The crews still salute, still fly, but the sense of purpose is gone. "We are ghosts, hunting ghosts," Spoden tells Karl, "and one day we will vanish like them." Far away, in the English countryside, the scientists who invented window read captured German reports. They are astonished by how completely it worked. "They believed it was sorcery," one says quietly. They couldn't imagine war being fought with silence. In truth, no one could, until now. The age of mechanical warfare is giving way to the age of invisible war. And for the men who once ruled the night sky, it feels like the world has turned inside out. Winter, 1944. The war has turned inward. The Reich burns nightly under the thunder of Allied bombers, and yet, to many Germans, it feels as though the war has gone eerily quiet. The defences that once roared to life with sirens, searchlights, and the crack of flak guns now stumble in confusion. Berlin, the heart of the Reich, braces itself for the inevitable. Inside an underground control centre, on the outskirts of the city, radar operators huddle over their consoles. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and despair. "Are they coming tonight?" one asks. "They're always coming," another mutters. At 10:30 p.m., the first echoes appear on the screens. Dozens of them, moving fast from the northwest. The senior controller issues orders to scramble fighters. Moments later, the scopes explode into chaos. Lines multiply, shadows merge. The enemy appears to be everywhere. "Window," the technician whispers, almost reverently. The order comes too late. When the Ju-88s reach the altitude of the bomber stream, the sky is a maze of false trails. Every radar pulse returns a dozen ghosts. Some aircraft chase them north toward the Baltic. Others climb high, only to find empty air. Meanwhile, 800 RAF bombers cross the city unopposed. From 20,000 feet, it looks like the world below is on fire. Entire neighborhoods burn in silence. To the crews, it feels detached, unreal, as if they are floating above the collapse of civilization itself. In the ruins below, civilians listen to the bombs without warning sirens. The radar net that once provided precious minutes of preparation is blind. "The sky gave no sound," one survivor writes, "only the wind and then the thunder." By morning, Berlin is scarred anew, but the greater damage lies unseen. In the hearts of those who realize their machines have betrayed them. The Luftwaffe had once ruled the skies through science. Now that science lies shattered in static, the night sky, once their fortress, has become their silence. In a dim room at Bletchley Park, the war sounds different. Here, it hums in bursts of static, in faint Morse code whispers, in the endless chatter of German radio. The men and women decoding it, mathematicians, linguists, and engineers, are listening not for words, but for patterns. Among them, a young officer named Dennis Kendall listens to the faint echo of a Luftwaffe transmission. "Their radar's flickering again," he murmurs. The British have learned to read German confusion like a language. When enemy messages shorten, when voices rise, when commands contradict, it means window has worked. Kendall marks the transmissions on a map. "Another gap in the Kammhuber Line," he reports. The analysts smile grimly. Every gap means safer skies for Allied crews and more chaos for Germany. At RAF Malvern, Joan Curran and her team refine their techniques still further. They test aluminum foil of new thicknesses, tuned to jam-evolving radar frequencies. They even experiment with timed releases to mimic entire Phantom squadrons. "We can make them see what isn't there," she says, "and hide what is." But not all feel triumph. One scientist writes in his diary, "We've blinded men who can no longer fight back. I wonder if they curse us or pity us." In the Luftwaffe's radar units, that pity might not be misplaced. Young operators sit for hours before silent screens, fingers trembling on dials that yield nothing. Some begin to hear things that aren't there, faint beeps, imagined echoes. Psychologists call it radar fatigue, a new illness born of invisible war. Oberleutnant Spoden, now grounded and exhausted, visits one such station. He sees the young men listening to static and says quietly, "You hear the ghost too?" The operator nods without looking up. Both men know the truth. The war for the skies has become a war for sanity. The machines have outgrown the men who built them. And somewhere in that silence, the future of warfare hums, unseen but unstoppable. March 1945. Germany is collapsing. Cities burn by night. Refugees fill the roads by day, and the once mighty Luftwaffe now exists mostly on paper. Yet in the ruins, the scientists and operators who remain are still trying to fight. Not with guns, but with frequencies. At a radar bunker outside Bremen, a group of engineers power up a new experimental set. The Berlin-Gerät, a centimetric radar copied hastily from captured Allied wreckage. The irony is brutal. The Germans are now rebuilding their eyes with fragments of the very technology that blinded them. It works, barely. The screen flickers, showing shapes that might be bombers, or clouds, or echoes from burning cities. But it's too late. The Allied jammers saturate the ether. "We can hear them, but we can't see them," one technician says, half laughing, half crying. Above them, the bombers pass in perfect formation. Unchallenged, unhindered, unstoppable. The once feared network that stretched from Denmark to France is now a graveyard of antennas and silence transmitters. For the Luftwaffe's remaining night fighter crews, the missions are suicide. They take off knowing they will find nothing, or everything. Phantom signals guide them into empty sky, or worse, into each other. One by one, they vanish into the black. At Allied command, new technology floods in. H2S radar, Fishpond GH, systems that make navigation nearly flawless. The irony is complete. The same science that Germany pioneered in 1939 has now left it blind and hunted. In his bunker, Hermann Göring fumes, shouting that his men no longer have the courage to fight. But courage is not the issue. The sky itself has turned against them. The electromagnetic spectrum, invisible, merciless, now belongs to the Allies. For Spoden, still alive but broken, the silence is unbearable. He writes in his logbook, "We used to hear the voices of our enemies in the sky. Now we hear nothing, only ourselves." The ghost network hums one last time, then fades into static. In London, victory seems near, but the lessons of the silent war are just beginning to take shape. At the Air Ministry, scientists and commanders gather to discuss the next frontier: electronic intelligence. "We've fought the first war of the invisible spectrum," one officer declares, "and we can never go back." They are already thinking ahead, to radar-guided missiles, to jamming networks, to machines that can trick or blind entire armies. The age of deception has arrived, and it will not end with the fall of Berlin. Among the papers on the table lies a report titled Operation Gomorrah: Tactical Effects of Radar Countermeasures. It details how Window reduced bomber losses by nearly half and crippled German defences within a single night. The men reading it know they've witnessed a revolution in warfare, and yet, in quieter corners of the room, others speak with unease. "We've built a weapon that lies," one scientist says softly. "How do we control that in peacetime?" Joan Curran, the woman who invented Window, has mixed feelings too. She knows her creation saved lives, perhaps tens of thousands, but it also helped erase entire cities. When a journalist later asks how she felt about her work, she replies simply, "It was necessary, but I never forgot what followed." Across the channel, the last surviving German radar crews sit in silence. Many have already surrendered. Others dismantle their equipment before the Allies arrive. For years, they had trusted the hum of their screens more than their own eyes. Now, those screens are blank. The war that began with engines and bullets is ending with frequencies and silence. And as the world edges toward peace, one truth remains: the sky will never be quiet again. April 1945. The Reich is on its knees. Soviet guns pound Berlin, and Allied bombers patrol the skies unopposed. The Luftwaffe's night fighter arm, once the envy of the world, is a ghost of its former self. At an airfield near Schleswig, Oberleutnant Peter Spoden receives his final orders. The message is terse: fly only if the fuel is worth the result. He stares at it for a long moment, then folds it into his pocket. His aircraft still gleams under the hangar lights, immaculate, useless. When night falls, the crews gather in silence. Some drink, some play cards. A few still fly, not to fight, but to escape. One pilot vanishes into the clouds and never returns. The others stop asking questions. Their radar screens, once the eyes of the Reich, are dead. The transmitters have been destroyed to prevent capture. The operators who once tracked bomber streams across Europe now sit idle, smoking in darkened rooms, their fingers tracing dust where the scopes used to glow. In the chaos of collapse, the Allies are advancing too fast to even jam anymore. They no longer need deception. The sky itself belongs entirely to them. From the Western Front to the Elbe, Allied pilots report an eerie stillness. "No fighters, no flak," one navigator writes. "Just silence, total silence." For the surviving German airmen, that silence is unbearable. Some can't sleep without the hum of radar, the pulse of transmissions, the rhythm of voices guiding them home. Without that, the night feels endless, a void where the war still whispers, but never answers. On May 2nd, Spoden burns his flight logbook. He watches the pages curl and blacken, each line of code and heading vanishing into smoke. For years he had lived by those signals. Now he's free of them, though freedom feels strangely hollow. He looks up at the sky one last time. It's clear, still, and silent. The silence he once feared has finally outlasted him. When the war ends, Europe wakes to a world transformed, not just in ruins, but in the invisible. In London, Washington, and Moscow, captured radar equipment, jammers, and reports are studied like sacred relics. The scientists who built Window and Naxos now speak the same language, the language of waves, interference, and deception. The Cold War is already being born, though no one yet calls it that. At the Nuremberg trials, military commanders speak of air power and morality. Few mention the invisible war, the blinding, the jamming, the trickery. Yet among airmen, it is all they can talk about. "We didn't just outfight them," one RAF veteran says. "We out-thought them." In a quiet interview years later, Peter Spoden admits something rare. "We were proud of our radar. It made us gods in the dark. But one night, it betrayed us. The screens went white. I realized then that we'd built our faith on machines." Across Britain, Joan Curran returns to her peacetime life. She never seeks fame, never profits from her invention. When asked how such a simple idea could cripple an empire, she smiles faintly. "War doesn't care about complexity," she says. "It only cares about what works." By 1946, the lessons of window shape every major military power's doctrine. Entire divisions of engineers are now devoted to electronic countermeasures. What began as desperation has become the backbone of modern warfare. But to those who lived it, the memory remains not of science, but of silence. That eerie stillness when the radar screens died, when pilots flew blind through a night so quiet it felt holy. The world moves forward, but in the hearts of those who survived, one sound endures: the hum of static that once divided life from death. The sky went silent that day, and humanity learned to listen differently ever since. The war ends not with a roar, but with a long exhale, a silence earned through fire and deception. When the guns stop, the bombers no longer rise, and the last searchlights fade from Europe's night sky, a strange calm settles over the continent. But it is not peace as the world once knew it. It is the quiet of realization. For the airmen who survived, the memories are not of victories or medals, but of the hum, the sound of static that marked the line between life and death. For German night fighter crews like Peter Spoden, that static was the sound of defeat. For the Allied crews who scattered window over burning cities, it was the sound of survival and guilt. The war had begun with men who believed the sky could be mastered by courage and steel. It ended with the truth that courage alone could not see through silence. The machine had outgrown the man. In the years that follow, nations rebuild. Scientists who once blinded each other now collaborate, laying the groundwork for radar navigation, weather tracking, and air traffic control. Peaceful uses born from a weapon meant to deceive. The technology that once turned the skies into lies now helps planes land safely through fog and darkness. And yet, every military since 1945 has carried the lesson forward. Control the invisible, and you control the war. From the Cold War's jamming stations to the digital conflicts of the modern age, every spark began with that single night over Hamburg, when radar went dark and the heavens turned traitor. In museums today, a small bundle of aluminum strips sits behind glass. Tourists walk past it without much thought, but to those who know, it represents a revolution. The moment when war learned to whisper. The men who fought that invisible battle are few now, their voices fading like the echoes they once chased across the night. Yet through them we remember something simple, almost sacred, that even in the age of machines, silence can be the most powerful weapon of all. And on that night, the night the sky went silent, the world learned that the deadliest battles are not always seen or heard, but felt.